offices overseas, because they may be able to work with foreign partners to help us pursue, bad actors elsewhere and their involvement.
Director, thank you. I hope to have maybe additional conversation in this regard as well. In September, the FBI will release its annual data set on violent crimes in the United States. That report will show what you have already acknowledged publicly, a spike in serious violent crime in a number of American cities, including significant increases in murder and aggravated assaults. Kansas, unfortunately, has not been immune. The city of Wichita reported 59 homicides in 2020, the highest total since 1993, and about one every 6 days. According to Wichita Police Chief Gordon Ramsey, this trend has continued into 2021. In your speech to the International Association of Chiefs of Police last year, you acknowledged the FBI can play a critical role in reducing that violent crime, including by surging agents and other FBI resources to affected cities by working together with state and local partners. Director Wray, what is the FBI doing to address these serious spikes in violent crime? And would you consider further surges of personnel and resources to those affected communities?
So we absolutely are concerned about the rise in violent crime, specifically the most dangerous type of violent crime, namely the homicide rates all over the country. And key to that is partnership. We are bringing our resources to bear through our 170 or so Safe Streets task forces, our 50 or so violent crime task forces. So you're talking about 500, give or take, FBI agents plus task force officers. I think we did 6,500 violent crime arrests amidst the worst of the pandemic. So you're talking about 14 a day. We are also trying to contribute in other ways through NICS, making sure that guns don't get in the hands of the people legally prohibited from having them. Our tip line, our lab supporting state and locals. And we have, to your point about surging resources, we have recently created a new violent crime rapid deployment team at headquarters, the purpose of which, run out of headquarters, I should say, the purpose of which is to be able to surge to sort of crisis situations. I know that in Kansas City, I don't mean Kansas City the city, but the division, we had 140 gang arrests and 200-something violent crime arrests last year. And I remember, I think we spoke once about in Wichita, there was a gang, the junior boy violent gang that, that one takedown largely dismantled a long-running gang in Wichita that, 25 arrests, seizing guns, drugs, money, and so forth. So we're going to be trying to do more and more of that wherever we can.
Director, I thank you and the Kansas City FBI Bureau for their attention to Kansas communities, Kansas City and Wichita in particular. My time has expired. I would just say to the Director, I also am the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. It's meeting at the same time. My absence from time to time today will not be a reflection on my lack of interest in what you have to say.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Madam Chairman. I watched the CNN show Sunday night on January 6th, and it's been nearly 6 months since the Capitol was attacked. And I think we still lack a clear picture of the FBI's understanding of the threat in the days leading up to the attack. The Post reported in January that dozens of individuals listed in the terrorist screening database traveled to Washington before the Capitol attack. The FBI's Washington field office, I understand, stated that the Bureau disrupted the travel of a number of individuals who were planning to travel to D.C., quote, with intentions to cause violence. It's my understanding that you testified last week to the House Oversight Committee that, quote, none of those people had indicated an intention to attack the Capitol. As you look at this now in perspective, Director Wray, could you clarify for us what the FBI knew and what it didn't know before the attack took place?
Well, I guess The first thing I would say about the facts leading up to January 6th is because of all the investigations we're doing right now, we're continuing to learn all sorts of things post-January 6th. And sometimes there gets to be a little bit of conflation about information that we're developing through those hundreds of cases with information that we had before. So I just want to put that out there in front, because I'm sure there will continue to be news coverage of different sorts as we move forward. I think what I would say is that before January 6th, we were, to my knowledge, aware that there would be large numbers of individuals coming to D.C. to participate in protests, and that we had some information that gave us concerns about the potential for violence more generally. There's, of course, this Norfolk report, which has gotten a lot of attention, which was one piece of information that was raw and unverified and unattributed, and we passed that 3 different ways as quickly as possible shortly after getting it. What we did not have, to my knowledge at least, is intelligence indicating that hundreds and hundreds of people were going to breach the Capitol complex. That, to my knowledge, we did not have. Now, you mentioned these individuals that we interviewed or disrupted before January 6th. I think there's a little bit of garble in maybe some of the news reporting. So I can't speak to the specific article that you were citing, but just in general, what we're talking about there are a handful, a small number of individuals who were previously predicated subjects of investigations who were approached in one way or another, interviewed, or in some other way disrupted from traveling. I want to be clear, though, there's a big difference between people indicating that they might travel to D.C. and people indicating they might travel to D.C. to commit a violent attack, much less a violent attack against the Capitol, which is not my understanding of what those individuals revealed beforehand.
I think many of us are trying to understand, and not to criticize as much as to be able to correct our systems, the number of people. And if you watch the CNN show Sunday night, which went on and was very graphic, there was no question when you really had pictures of who was there and what they were doing, that people came with an intent to do what they did. And I have never really been able to get a clear picture of what was known and what wasn't known, because what I saw on television Sunday night was something I've never seen before in this country like that. And it was shocking.
Well, we consider the whole event shocking and appalling, and we are absolutely determined to make sure that we do our part to make sure it never happens again. So I want to be crystal clear on that. I think, you know, one thing that gets a little bit lost sometimes is that even though we've had hundreds and hundreds of domestic terrorism investigations ongoing, actually very, very few, almost none of the people who we've arrested since January 6th, for January 6th, were people.
How many people did you arrest, have been arrested?
I think we've got around, well, I think it's a little over 500 arrests now. Once you include, there are a few that have been done by some of our partners as well. So the FBI's arrests are close to 500, and then when you add in the partners, it's a little over 500. And I want to be clear, we've got hundreds more investigations still ongoing, and we expect in many cases we'll have even more serious charges against some of the people we already have charged. So this is far from over, and with each arrest and each case we bring, not only are we driving towards accountability for the attack, but we're also learning more about what was out there beforehand so that we can use that to get better going forward.
Well, it was pretty clear from the footage I saw Sunday night that a lot was out there that came with intent. Now, proving it is another story, but this was an eye-opener for me as I watched that show. And I think it's really important that we understand not to criticize, it's over, but to know what to do to prevent that from ever happening again.
Well, I agree that absolutely we want to do our part, and I haven't seen the particular CNN show that you're talking about, but certainly we're looking at things like how can we develop better sources, how can we get better with data analytics for the volumes of information that we get, how can we deal with the encryption issue, which I know is something you and I have spoken about in the past, and that is very much a phenomenon with this threat because a lot of the most significant and revealing communications between these actors, and we saw it related to the January 6th people now that we're investigating, and we saw it over the summer with some of the attackers in those events, is through encrypted messaging communications. And we've got to figure out a solution to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Senator Graham.
Thank you, Director Wray, and please pass on all of our respect for what you and your agents and support personnel do. It seems to me you got a pretty full plate. Is that fair to say?
It certainly feels full.
Okay. If Senator Moran's right, which I'm sure he is, when you look at personnel cost increases and generally cost of doing business, most of the increases requested, about 65%, go to that, and $150 million left for new programs. Do you agree with that? New capabilities?
Well, I think sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time in this format tracking all the numbers. I think one of the challenges is that last year's budget had a significant number of enhancements, but at the same time also a bunch of reductions to the base. So it's like a giveth one hand, taketh away with the other.
If the committee decided to, say, increase by $100 million your budget, could you spend it wisely?
I can assure you that any money that this committee thinks
Good.
Sees fit, I promise it'll be good to good use.
I believe you. So there's a record number in certain jurisdictions, and really a trend all over the country, of retirements by police officers and recruiting problems. Are you familiar with this?
Very much so.
What do you think is causing this?
I think this is a very, very challenging time for the law enforcement.
Have you ever known a more challenging time since you've been in the business?
I have not.
Okay. What can we do to deal with it?
I think it starts with a recognition that it takes an incredibly special person to get up in the morning and put his or her life on the line for a total stranger.
Right.
And then, when you stop and think about how few people are willing to do that, think about how many people are willing to do that every single day for an entire career. And so I think it starts with a level of gratitude and respect for those people.
Is this a fair statement that police reform, I think, is necessary? Better training, better standards, more exposure to departments for the conduct of the officers legally, but at the same time, a deeper appreciation for the job that police officers do. Do you agree that those two things are not inconsistent?
I would agree with that.
Okay, and I hope we can deliver there. In terms of the crime wave that we're facing, increase in murders particularly, the administration is going to announce a 5-point program today to deal with the rise in crime. Were you consulted by the administration in that program?
Well, yes, we're working with the Justice Department through our piece of it. I haven't seen the announcement itself, but we're working.
Do you know what the 5-point plan is?
I don't. I know our part. I don't know
what's
the other
your part?
So we are working with the department on something called Project Safe Neighborhoods, which is a revival of an effort that you may remember from the Bush administration, frankly, and it's a multi-point plan geared towards attacking gun violence all across the country, and so the FBI is working with all of our partners on that.
Do you believe that one of the reasons crime is on the rise is that certain jurisdictions have basically eliminated bail? You catch them on Monday morning and they're out on the streets Monday afternoon.
Well, I do think there are a lot of causes, but I think one of the causes of the violent crime spike are certain kinds of prosecution practices and decrease
Yeah,
them.
we're not prosecuting enough people, and we're sending a signal that maybe you can rob or loot a store and get away with it, and it sort of escalates. Is that fair to say?
Well, I guess I would put it this way. I think there's nothing more disheartening to a law enforcement officer to see somebody that you worked hard to arrest promptly back out committing a crime again.
Yeah,
There's enough people to go after the first
Yeah,
time without the same person over and over again.
I totally agree. That's the problem. I hope we'll deal with it. When it comes to Russia, Dark Side is supposedly responsible for the Colonial Pipeline attack, and Revil, R-E-V-I-L, the attack on JBS meat processing attack. Both of these are Russian-speaking criminal organizations. Do you believe it's possible that they could operate in Russia without Putin's government knowing about it?
So many things I'd like to say. Let me put it
This is the chance to say.
Yes, right. Well, let me say this. You'd mentioned Dark Side. The other organization you're talking about goes by the name R-Evil.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Aptly named.
Yeah, that's right.
I think what I would say is this. Over and over again.
We're policymakers. I know my time is up. We got to make a decision eventually how to respond to Russia. We've had 2 cyber terrorism attacks emanating from Russian-speaking criminal enterprises. I think all of us believe it's impossible for these people to operate in Russia without some acknowledgement some support by the government, or at least lack of action on their part. We got to make a decision. Would we be irresponsible in assuming that Putin is giving cover to these groups, and the only way things will change is for him to pay a price for giving that cover? Or is that illogical on our part?
I think the Russian government has a lot of room for improvement on this subject. Let me just leave it at that.
Thank you, Senator Ram. Very diplomatic, Director Wray. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Director, for your service and the service and sacrifice of so many of your men and women in the FBI. January 6th was a disheartening moment, and I'm widely understating that. There was an ad hoc response which relied a great deal on the National Guard and then other police elements. We are looking forward now, as we should, to a more coherent response to the situation occurs again. And as an alternative to the National Guard, I think, and like your comments, if we could put together a federal, state, local law enforcement group that is trained, is integrated, is compensated, and is coordinated for such an event with the participation of the Bureau in key areas, would that be more effective than summoning Guard from everywhere?
Well, I certainly, let me say it this way, I certainly understand the attraction of having a law enforcement kind of ready to deploy type of force. We've worked very well with the National Guard, but there are challenges that they face, you know, in their ability to deploy. Now, on the FBI side, just to be clear, you know, we don't, and really never have in our 113-year history, really done crowd control or static defense or things like that. So we don't really have the skills, the training, the equipment to do that part of it. What we do have are overseen by our critical incident response group. We have things like our hostage rescue team that can deploy in certain situations. We have crisis negotiators. We have aerial surveillance in certain instances, you know, things like that. That we can lend to the effort, but I think most of what you're talking about would ultimately be more on the shoulders of other agencies, so I want to be careful not to speak for them.
No, but I think you have critical elements that you could engage, and they would have to rehearse, practice, et cetera. So I think one of the lessons is ad hoc is not that good when you're facing a mob of folks. The other aspect here, too, is just for the record, the National Guard's still waiting to get paid hundreds of millions of dollars, which could affect their training this summer. So for all my colleagues, if you could urge everyone to pay the National Guard. That would be useful. One of the most difficult issues that you face in your intelligence capacity is trying to recognize and respect First Amendment rights to communicate freely with your responsibility to monitor what's going on the web. Can you give us an idea of how you make that call? I presume you have active, well, let me not presume. Do you have active sort of intelligence agents that are going through the web and trying to identify?
So this is a complicated topic. I'll try to do my best to give sort of a shorthand version, but there may be nuances that get lost in my description. So there are longstanding policies that go back, 10, 15 plus years. The Attorney General guidelines as implemented by something called the DIOG, which are all designed to tell us what we can and cannot do, especially when it implicates civil liberties and so forth. And that there's parts of it that deal with social media. And so what we can do depends on whether or not we've got, what level of predication we have, and whether we've got an authorized purpose. We do get all kinds of tips and leads from the public, from partners of all shapes and sizes, some of which include things on social media. And we pursue those in whatever way we can under those policies. What we don't do, and some people, I think, are confused about this, what we don't do is just have people sitting there, at least without proper predication and an authorized purpose, just kind of monitoring somebody's, internet traffic and trying to see if there's something there just in case. That we don't currently do. Now, in theory, somebody could look at the policies and decide that the balance needs to be struck a little differently. There's all kinds of considerations that go into that, but to give a really fulsome answer to your question would probably require a much longer discussion.
I think it probably require a law review article, at least. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wray, I want to thank you for your long service to our nation. Very much appreciated. The first topic I'd like to cover with you has to do with the morale of the FBI. I had the great honor of serving and working with a great FBI team in my previous position as ambassador to Japan. Your rank and file are patriotic and honorable men and women who I'm certain wake up every day looking at how they can best serve the United States of America. But over the past 5 years, I think the reputation of the FBI has really come under challenge. We've seen a presidential candidate spied upon in 2016. We've seen headquarter investigators using blatant political bias as they pursue investigations. And I think that really has called into question America's confidence in the agency. I know it's disheartening to the men and women that serve at the FBI who came to serve their nation, not to pick sides in a presidential battle. I'm interested, and I know you're working hard on this, but what are you doing, what are you undertaking to restore America's confidence and the confidence of the men and women that work for you in the agency as a nonpartisan and an unbiased, non-political institution?
So I have a lot to say on this subject. First, I'll stack our workforce up against any workforce, anywhere, anytime. A lot of the press coverage and discussion has been based on essentially 2 investigations over about an 18-month period involving a small number of people. And we're an organization of 37,000 people. It's been around for 113 years, doing thousands and thousands of investigations every year. And what I see, what I hear from the American people themselves is a resounding, even consistent appreciation and respect for what our folks do. The hundreds of, we speak through our work, the hundreds of kids we've saved, the terrorist attacks we've disrupted, the scores of violent gangs, COVID fraudsters, Chinese spies, et cetera. And I say that from having visited all 56 of our field offices, most of them more than once, met with law enforcement partners from all 50 states and over 50 countries, spoken with judges, prosecutors, private sector leaders, community leaders, victims and their families. And the refrain I get is very different from what's in a lot of the news coverage. Now, I'll give you a bright spot because I know you care about our workforce. Our attrition rate is 0.4%. And you'd be hard-pressed to find an organization out there, public or private, with an attrition rate that low. Second, our recruiting, that is the number of Americans all across this country, including every state represented on this subcommittee, applying to be special agents, so expressing their view of the FBI through their feet by trying to sign up and put their lives on the line, working with us for an entire career, has tripled what it was when I started in this job.
That's very encouraging.
And that's through the pandemic, and to me, that speaks volumes about what Americans everywhere actually think about the FBI.
And I think you know that this committee stands behind you as well, and we want to see this budget deployed in a way that continues to support the morale and the patriotic men and women that work for you, and I think that speaks volumes, the statistics that you went through. And like you, I have a lot to say and feel about this as well, because I think it's a great agency that you run, and I want to see the pristine image of the agency restored once again, and appreciate your leadership in that direction.
Thank you.
If I could turn right now to another area. This is having to do with a significant increase in crime that we saw in 2020. And again, another surge in crime that's underway right now. Homicide rates up 30% last year, another 25% this year. Back in 2020, Operation Legend was put into play. Sadly, Operation Legend was named for a 4-year-old boy who was killed by a stray bullet in Kansas City. That operation led to the arrest of some 6,000 criminals, a confiscation of 17 kilos of fentanyl that are killing our kids every day. In light of the surge that's underway yet again in crime, why is it that Operation Legend was brought to an end in December of 2020?
I can't, Operation Legend was something that was run by the Justice Department, so I probably would leave that part to the Justice Department. Certainly, I agree with you that I think it was a big success. It probably was not a sustainable effort, in perpetuity, given the way in which we were all essentially just surging resources from all over. I mentioned, I think in response to Senator Moran's question, that on our end, we've recently created this violent crime rapid deployment team, which is an effort to take a little bit of the idea behind Legend and make that available, but that's not going to be a complete answer in its own right. And I think you're exactly right that this is a topic that cannot be overlooked in the middle of everything else that's going on, because I think most Americans right now, the security threat they're most concerned about is violent crime.
Yeah. Well, thank you for leadership in that direction, Director Wray. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Leahy, and Chairman of the Appropriations Committee.
Thank you very much, Director. Always good to see you, and thank you for being here. I think we can all talk about how much we appreciate what the men and women of the FBI do and truly mean it. I've known several of your predecessors, worked with them and worked with the FBI both in Vermont and down here, and I do appreciate their skill and their dedication. And it made me think that with all these wild conspiracy theories are going on about the insurrection on January 6th, all of which have tried to portray the attack on the Capitol as anything but a violent assault by domestic extremists on the heart of the democracy, even though everybody who was here saw that's exactly what it was. You helped debunk some of these theories when we last spoke in March. You testified in the Judiciary Committee. But it seems a new crop of excuses and conspiracy theories brought up since you testified before the House Oversight Committee. I think that was last week. So let me give you another opportunity to discredit the dangerously bogus claims that have been floating around about the January 6th attack, particularly those that are relating to the FBI's involvement in the attack. And considering these things, claiming that they were, let me just ask you directly. Did anyone in the Trump White House ever encourage or direct you or anyone in your staff to downplay the potential threat of violence on January 6th when Congress was scheduled to take a constitutionally mandated presidential vote count?
No.
That's, I'll take that elaborate answer as a no, and I appreciate it. Now, you're responsible for investigating federal election crimes such as, and I'm glad you had a chance to say that because you've probably seen some of this baloney that's come out since the last testimony. The FBI is responsible for investigating federal election crimes such as voter suppression that intentionally target minority-protected classes. The growing wave of voter suppression laws in dozens of states raise serious concerns. There could be an accompanying spike in federal election crimes committed in furtherance of suppression efforts. What are you doing at the FBI to prepare for the upcoming elections in which many of us expect to see unprecedented level of voter suppression?
So we're doing a few different things. We have election crime coordinators in every field office, and of course they focus on the full manner of types of election crimes, and they're all well connected with each other and through our criminal investigative division. Voter suppression specifically, when we get involved, is more through our civil rights program. And so we work closely with the Justice Department, both the Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's offices on that. In addition, you may remember from our past engagements that I created the Foreign Influence Task Force early on in my tenure. And although that's focused on foreign influence, of course, we are concerned about foreign influence, malign foreign influence that could in turn have a sort of surreptitious effect on voter suppression. So we're coming at that piece of it as well.
And as you know, I supported you when you formed that. Do you need further resources? Now here's your chance. It's not OMB asking you, I'm asking you as chairman of the committee, do you need further resources in this area?
We're busier than we ever have been, and I can assure you that if the Congress sees fit to send us more resources on this, I'm quite confident that it will be put to good use.
I thought that was probably so. And my last question is on NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check. We've seen, let's see, last year you processed nearly 40 million firearm background checks. I think it's about 20 million so far this year. Congress provided you 179 million in emergency funding to help help address the increased workload of gun background checks. How has that been utilized, and is it enough?
So we've been able to put it to use, and we're very grateful for it because of the uptick in the operational tempo out there to hire more personnel and to make system improvements. That funding was, as I recall, essentially a 2-year funding, which explains why we didn't have more of that in this budget request. But make no mistake, the pace that we're on, we will be needing more of that in the future for sure, because right now we're having to pull personnel from other critical functions to help out and do things like pay mandatory overtime just to be able to kind of triage the situation. So long term, we're absolutely going to need more resources, both for personnel out there and for systems improvements.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Wray, and thank you to all of your, those in the FBI. We thank them from the bottom of our hearts of everything that they do every day. And I want to thank Chairman Leahy for teeing me up for this, because when you said out there is in Clarksburg, West Virginia. where they run the background checks on the NICS system. And one of the statistics, Senator Leahy said almost 20 million already this year, but we had the highest May ever of 3,222,105 background checks, which is an amazing. So I'm happy to hear, and I want to be as supportive as we possibly can be through this committee to help you with the resources that you need. So I'm going to ask a different question rather than tout what a great job they do out in Clarksburg, because we both know that. And we've heard about the rise in crime over the last 2 years, particularly this summer seems to be particularly troublesome. What do you correlate any of that with the rising number of firearm purchases? How do you all analyze that at the FBI, the rising number of background checks that are being performed in terms of purchases?
Well, I don't know that we've been able to
I mean, people buying
settle on
weapons as
one
a
specific
defensive-
factor, but
yeah.
certainly there have been a number of factors that drive, I think, the spike in violent crime. So COVID had a huge impact. You're talking about everything from trial backlogs, early releases, unemployment, et cetera. We have more juveniles committing violent crime, and there's all kinds of challenges in our legal systems for dealing with them. I mentioned in response to, I think, Senator Graham's question, certain prosecution practices and decreased sentences.
Right.
I think that has an effect. The prevalence of firearms in the wrong hands is certainly an issue as well, especially gun trafficking across state lines and things like. These are all things that I think collectively contribute to the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rise also is, obviously, if you're going to legally purchase and go through a background check, it probably is in response to a rising criminal element for a defense. I mean, more people are feeling defenseless, more people are at home more, and feel like they're maybe making those purchases to protect them and their family. So I thank you for making sure those are getting safely into those hands. I want to talk about cyber attacks. I asked the same question to Secretary Blinken and Attorney General Garland about ransomware. It's particularly interesting to me because it's semi-new phenomenon, and it's every article you read, it's not really know how to handle it and what to do, and that it is a global issue as well. And so I'm interested to know if you're working with your global partners on how to address ransomware, and then you read from time to time what the different advice is. Pay the ransom, don't pay the ransom. How are you all addressing that? I mean, is that something that I don't know that you give advice, but you would, for a large breach like the Colonial Pipeline, certainly have to be involved with that. And how you're seeing ransomware, we know it's going to get worse. And so I suppose that's why the cyber part of your budget is going to be increased, and that would be the area that you would look at the ransomware issue. Am I correct in assuming that?
Certainly, the part of the cyber enhancement request, ransomware is a huge component of that. It's going to go to all the different kinds of cyber intrusions. Right. Where some nations, something like SolarWinds would also be the kind of thing that would be addressed through that enhancement. But ransomware, I think, has become particularly challenging because we've seen the total volume of money paid, I think, triple, over the last year or so. You're talking about higher and higher ransoms, more sophisticated attacks. We're talking about ransomware as a service, which the Colonial Pipeline case illustrated, where sophisticated developers of ransomware then basically outsource it to less sophisticated actors, which just expands the problem and the availability of the technique. And they're also now more and more engaging in a sort of a mix of both the locking up of the system and the exfiltration and leaking or extortion that way as well. As far as guidance to victims, our guidance is don't pay the ransom. But let me say this, I understand that it's a hard decision for a company or a municipal government or whatever it happens to be to make. And the one thing that I think is most important by far is that whether they pay or don't pay, they get in touch with us right away, early on, because when they do, there's all kinds of things that we can do. In the Colonial Pipeline case, for example, we were, as has been reported, able to essentially seize and confiscate some of the ransom, a lot of the ransom, and to hit the bad guy where it hurts. In other cases, it's not all the time, but it does happen. Sometimes through other work we've done, we might have the decryption key and be able to help the company unlock their data without having to pay the ransom. Right. Best of both worlds. So there's a lot of things we can do. What we can't do is much if we're not coordinated with early. But our strategy has to be whole of government, working with the private sector, working with foreign partners, as you mentioned, because invariably these actors are overseas, going after the actors, going after their helpers, going after their infrastructure, going after their money. So it's a comprehensive type of approach.
Well, we want to be, again, as supportive as we can be because this is a growing problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Before I call on Senator Braun, we just had a vote called. My intent, unless someone else shows up for the committee, is to go ahead and ask Senator Braun and Senator Kennedy for their questioning and then to end the hearing. So just so everybody understands where we're going. Senator Braun.
Plan in place that you had ready to go should things unfurl the wrong way?
Well, we had a couple things. We had pre-positioned tactical response, SWAT teams from the National Capital Region to be available if called upon by our partners who are responsible for the security of the Capitol complex, or attacks elsewhere in the National Capital Region, because we didn't have, as I've said before, intelligence, to my knowledge, that indicated that there were going to be hundreds and hundreds of people trying to storm and siege the Capitol. So we had pre-positioned tactical resources. We had command posts that we stood up both in the Washington field office and at headquarters in our SIOC that we were running the day before and the purpose of those, the reason those are important is because you got all these other agencies and partners with people there too, and the idea is to make sure that everybody's getting the same information, as quickly as possible, and that's the goal of that. So those are some of the things that we were doing beforehand, and we of course had put out different kinds of intelligence products, essentially bulletins and things like that, over the course of the year leading up to January 6th. So those are a few of the things that we were doing.
And did you share all that information with the Capitol Police along the way, and especially leading up to when you started to see more traffic online?
Well, I'm not aware of any pertinent information we didn't share, but I know that these intelligence products I was listing off, of course, those would have gone not just to the Capitol Police, but to MPD and all the other partners as well. To the extent that we had sort of late-breaking raw information, there's been a lot of discussion about this information from our Norfolk field office. That was something that we passed on to our partners, including, in particular, the Capitol Police, in 3 different ways. Now, that was raw, unverified information, but in the abundance of caution, we thought we'd better get it to people as quickly as possible. And then this command post part of it is so important because that's where, having been in these command posts, every 30 minutes, there's a briefing where every agency is quickly going through, here's what we're hearing, here's what we're seeing, and they're all there and it's all being shared, and that's the point of it, to be able to do it in a nimble, agile, transparent way.
And in retrospect, would you have done anything differently?
Well, certainly, we've now arrested, close to 500, a little over 500 if you include our partners' people. And so if we had known that those people were going to do what they did, there's all kinds of things we would have done differently. We are more broadly trying to look at, can we develop better sources to anticipate things like this? Can we develop better data analytics to deal with the deluge, the terabytes and terabytes of information to separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were? We're looking at the encryption issue because a lot of the communications between the domestic terrorists are happening through encrypted platforms that we don't have a ready-made lawful access solution to. And of course, we're going to be looking at how we review and evaluate open source information, social media, that kind of thing.
So does that mean you think it was maybe more spontaneous than planned? Or would you have, if it had been that obvious in terms of the planning of it, probably would have done more?
Well, I think it's a little complicated to answer. The reason I say that is because you in terms of the people committing crimes on January 6th, you kind of have two buckets of people. You have one group of people who clearly committed crimes, including violence and destruction, in a more spontaneous way. But you also had some other people that we now know from investigative work we're doing after January 6th, that were particularly bad actors who had infiltrated and were more organized among themselves. That's a smaller group, but they are the most dangerous ones.
One final question. Capitol's surrounded by a non-scalable fence. To me, in being here, obviously, ever since then, hadn't seen any credible threats. You may know of more. Do you think that fence needs to remain up, or can we take it down? Because to me, I think there needs to be a good argument that something is impending or likely, or either it needs to come down, not only for the look, but for the cost of it to boot. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I'm not sure I could really weigh in on that. I mean, we as I mentioned in response to one of the earlier questions, we really don't have expertise in static defense and physical security in that sense. So that's a question really better directed to the people who have that.
And have you gotten any cues for any other impending incidents that might require you to keep it up? I mean, does the intel show that there's an imminent threat of anything, or does it show the opposite?
Well, again, without reference to any fencing issue, I don't think, at least to my knowledge, we're not tracking any specific or credible threats to the Capitol.
Sounds like a good reason to take the fence down. Thank you.
Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairwoman Shaheen, Ranking Member Moran, FBI Director Wray. It's great to be with you again. And I just want to thank you and the 37,000 men and women of the FBI who do the hard and difficult and demanding work of keeping us safe each and every day. I'm mindful always of the sacrifices of law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level, and join you in grieving the loss, the line of duty death of Special Agents Alfin and Schwarzenberger earlier this year. And I'm always conscious of the ways in which the safety of the men and women in law enforcement is one of the paramount concerns you carry day in and day out. We also have, an obligation to make sure that law enforcement is conducting itself in a way that's transparent and respectful and appropriate. And I'm enthusiastic about the President's commitment to have federal law enforcement now deployed with body-worn cameras, and look forward to hearing from you as that is implemented going forward. Back in March, when I think I last saw you, I asked for an assurance that the FBI as an organization would be as responsive as possible to requests from members of the Judiciary Committee regarding outstanding requests for information. Senator Whitehouse just spoke to this earlier this week, and he and I have requests that are now 2 years old and have gone without any response. Will you commit to working with us to get appropriate and responsive answers for these outstanding questions now from the last Congress?
I'm not tracking the specific piece of correspondence, but certainly I will have my staff follow up with yours and see how we can be more timely and helpful.
Please, because it's something that, I think has significantly agitated Senator Whitehouse and a number of other members of the Judiciary Committee about responsiveness and transparency, and I'd love to work with you to get this resolved. We've seen a spike in violent crime in a lot of places around the country. My hometown of Wilmington is one of them. The President's speaking to this today, and I think we need to ensure that federal, state, and local law enforcement work collaboratively to address this uptick. The FBI can be particularly helpful by providing training and resources. The county police department I was associated with for a decade, nothing was more desired than period at the FBI Academy, both as a professionalization tool and to build out a network of professional colleagues. How does the FBI plan to continue to strengthen partnerships with state and local law enforcement in cities like Wilmington and in counties like Newcastle, Delaware?
So I completely agree that partnerships are critical, really across everything we do, but especially on violent crime. And in fact, one of my 4 pillars for the organization has been partnerships. And my message to our folks has been, we want every partner to be able to say there's no better partner than the FBI. Now, you mentioned a couple ways in which we do that. The National Academy at Quantico, where we train sort of the stars of the future in sort of upper middle management in state and local police departments. That was something we're very proud of. It's been around for decades. It was stalled somewhat during the pandemic for obvious reasons, but I'm very excited that it's starting back up again soon. And we expect to be all in on that. Now, locally, we try to do it through task forces where we try to have our 2, the FBI's 2, plus our partners' 2 equal more than 4, make it 5, 6, 7. And there have been some great examples of that, including in Wilmington. I know there was a gang, I think it was like the G-Shine gang or something like that, where I think there were close to 40 arrests. But what was interesting, the reason I bring that one up is that during the pandemic, federal grand juries were largely on hold in a lot of places, including in Delaware. But our folks were able to basically take our investigative work, working with our state and local partners. And so most of the arrests ended up being local arrests, but with an FBI investigation to support them. So it's a great example of the point you're making.
Well, I look forward to that continued partnership and to strengthening and deepening it. On the body-worn cameras, the directive that they be deployed, ATF, FBI, DEA, marshals, I support. Does your budget fully support that deployment and implementation, or do you need additional funding to fully implement this?
It's a good question. We will need. Right now, the budget request that we have is geared not towards the FBI agents and body-worn cameras, but towards our task force officers. And again, not the cameras themselves, but through all the pretty significant expense associated with the storage of the footage. On the FBI side, we're, as you referenced, there's a phased-in plan that includes a pilot in a couple field offices for us, and then it'll go from there. And we will certainly need, potentially quite significant resources to be able to cover the costs for all of our personnel of not just the storage, but in their case, the cameras themselves.
Well, I look forward to getting an updated request from you in that regard. When it comes to NICS background checks, last year there was a 40% increase in NICS background check requests compared to the previous year. That pace may simply increase again this year. And given the current rules, if the NICS system doesn't return a result within 3 days, buyers are permitted to proceed. Has the NICS section been able to keep pace with this steadily increasing workload, or are there more guns now being sold after a background check wasn't completed within that 3-day window? And are you planning to request increased resources for NICS?
So the good news is that our workforce at NICS is extraordinary and very hardworking, and even with the 40 million record-breaking number of checks we had last year, they were still able to process 95 to 96% of the requests within the 3 days. But as you mentioned, the pace is increasing even this year. As far as whether we have enough resources for it, the supplemental that we got covered us for essentially 2 years in terms of increases, which is why you didn't see more of it in the 22 budget request. But we absolutely will need more resources for NICS following that, because otherwise it's just a short-term fix.
My last question, Mr. Temporary.
Well, this is a question for Senator Kennedy, who was held to the exact time in another subcommittee. May I continue to recognize Senator Coons and then recognize you, Senator Kennedy?
Last question with
Senator
the
Coons.
forbearance of Senator Kennedy, deeply appreciated. I think all of us are concerned about steadily increasing efforts by China in espionage, in trade secret theft, and some of the ways in which we've seen both state and non-state actors recently engage in a variety of expensive, complex, and difficult attacks. Does the FBI need additional resources to protect the private entities who lack the resources to resist sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attacks?
Well, we are essentially asking for more resources, a lot of it which would be going to that mission, both through the counterintelligence enhancement that we requested and through our cyber enhancement. But there's no question that there is no counterintelligence threat greater than the threat posed by China. And we're opening a new, as I mentioned in my opening, new investigation every 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours, and it's about a 1,300% economic espionage investigation increase over the last decade. And so this is a challenge that dwarfs, in many ways, the resources we have. So anything that the Congress can send our way to help with this will be put very much to good use.
Well, thank you very much, Director Wray, and thank you for your forbearance, Senator Moran and Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy is recognized.
I want to follow up, Mr. Director, on a point made by Senator Leahy. He talked about the massive voter suppression that he's expecting in 2022. Do your intelligence reports show there's going to be massive voter suppression in 2022?
I don't believe I characterized the voter suppression threat as massive, and I'm not aware of any intelligence assessment we've done that quantifies it. Certainly voter suppression is a concern. It's something we investigate, something we pursue.
Okay. On the NICS database, where do you get the information for it?
For the NICS database? So a lot of sources, but most of the information is coming from state and local law enforcement.
Are they all sending in all the information they're supposed to?
We are continuing to improve that. The Fixed NICS Act that Congress put in place has been a big help in that regard, and every year we're increasing the completeness of the NICS database, but there's still room for improvement.
Yeah, there's still a lot of holes in it, aren't there?
There are, yes.
Yeah. And the truth is, I mean, for some, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but my understanding is that for some, at the state and local level, it's just not a priority. It's not that they're sitting around watching Netflix. They've just got, they're busy doing other stuff. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, I understand why you would describe it that way. I've got to be a little bit careful to characterize our partners as distracted. But I will say that I've gone out to NICS and put on the headset and sat there with the operator, listened to the calls and see how it works. And some of these things, especially when you start getting into misdemeanor domestic violence offenses and things like that, it can get kind of complicated. And if the records out in whatever jurisdiction it is aren't ready at hand or clear, it can become a real challenge. And that was magnified during the pandemic, because a lot of departments, local departments, were not at work. And so that
Well, I read about the president and others saying, well, the problem is we need to expand background checks. And it just seems to me that a big part of our problem, nothing's perfect, of course, but a big part of our problem is that the current system we have is only as good as the information inputted. And all the information isn't being inputted. It's just not. And I think Fixed NICS did help. And I think it's better, but I don't think it's well. And it would seem to me that that would be a logical place to start. Is my thinking faulty?
I don't think your thinking is faulty. I think we all share the goal of keeping guns out of the hands of those legally prohibited from having them, which should be the table stakes in this endeavor, and that's what the NICS system is designed to do. To the extent that the holes that you identified are holes in different agencies and departments, you know, a patchwork around the country, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that some of them may need, you know, grant funding or resources to help them, because it may be a resource issue for them.
As I say, I'm not suggesting they're just sitting around watching Netflix. They're working. They've been cussed and discussed and accused of everything in the world, and their budget's been cut, and then we wonder why crime goes up. But so I'm not criticizing them. I'm just pointing out that it seems to me that the system is only good as the data that's put into it. Let me ask you a final question. I just want your opinion on this. Why do you think Chicago's become the largest outdoor shooting range in the world?
Well, I mean, I think I've referenced a lot of the factors from a national perspective. I don't know that I can, sitting here right now, give you a Chicago-specific explanation, but certainly some of those same trends that I described nationally would undoubtedly be at play in Chicago. I know that, you know, over the past year, we've had, you know, 200, this is just the FBI now, you know, 270 gang arrests in Chicago, 150 maybe violent crime arrests, and that's just in the past year or so. And I know that our partners there, we have some great partners in Chicago, you know, Police Department, among other agencies, and they're all stretched pretty thin.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you.
Senator Kennedy, thank you. If there's no further questions to be asked this afternoon, the senators have until June the 29th to submit additional questions for the subcommittee's official hearing record. We request that the FBI respond within 30 days. The subcommittee stands in recess.
Thank you. Thank you.